In the name of God, the Compassionate, the Merciful. A few hours ago, Pope Francis, the highest Christian religious authority and spiritual leader to over 1.3 billion baptized Catholics, landed in Iraq. Not only is the pontiff visiting a country most people associate with war and terrorism, but perhaps the most surprising thing he will do whilst there is his visit to Grand Ayatollah Sistani, who is the highest religious authority for Shia Muslims in the world. Now, this visit raises a lot of questions. Most notably, why is this meeting in particular such a big deal? Who are Shia Muslims? And why is the holy city of Najaf so significant? Now let's start with that last question. And in order to understand the significance of Najaf, we need to talk about the significance of the Vatican. Strange, right? Bear with me for a minute. You see, most people can be forgiven for forgetting that the Vatican is the site of the burial of a personality that we don't talk about nearly as often as we should. St. Peter's Basilica houses the tomb of the Apostle Peter, also known as Simon, the son of Jonah. The Catholic Church recognizes Peter as the first pope and, quote, vicar of Christ, meaning his successor. Now the Shia recognize Peter as the cousin and, more importantly, Christ appointed heir. Matthew 16 quotes Jesus as saying, I tell you that you are Peter, you are my rock, according to some translations. And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loosen on earth will be loosened in heaven. These are the words of Jesus Christ to Peter. Shias will be reminded of the Prophet's statement, Man kuntu mawlah, fahada aliyun mawlah, which are the words of the Holy Prophet of Islam as he appointed his successor, Imam Ali. In John 21:15, again in the Bible, Jesus is also quoted to have instructed Peter, Simon, to quote unquote feed my sheep, tend my lamb, and look after my flock, which is taken to mean that he was bestowed the highest authority in Christianity, at least in the Catholic Church. Now, the symbolism here cannot be overstated. The pontiff departs the Vatican, where the vicar of Christ is buried, to visit the ancient city of Najaf, where the vicar of Muhammad was buried. What makes Najaf so special isn't the Islamic seminary, as important as that is, but that it's the site of the majestic mausoleum of Imam Ali, appointed heir and successor of the Prophet of Islam. To us, the papal visit highlights the historical link between Peter on the one hand and Imam Ali on the other, one prophetic successor with another. Najaf is also significant for a number of other reasons that many people don't know about. It is also where prophets Adam and Noah are buried. It is where Moses saw the burning bush and where God spoke to Moses for the first time, appointing him as his prophet. Critically, however, what makes it so incredibly important is that according to Shia Muslims, the promised Messiah, known as the Mahdi, is prophesied to live there when he reappears at the end of times. The one whose lineage goes back to both the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, and you guessed it, coincidentally, to Saint Peter. Once again, history goes full circle and divine justice is established via the two blessed chains of sainthood and beatitude. Now, theology aside, what makes this visit historic is the fact that the Pope will visit the humble home of the Grand Ayatollah. Now, I want you to think about this word, which I'm sure, even if you're a non-Muslim, you've heard it before. For decades, the title Ayatollah was used as a pejorative and with contempt towards the entire Shia faith, particularly by officials and institutions adopting the Saudi regime's narrative. What does it actually mean? It's a title given to religious figures when they reach a certain level of scholarship. This is not a political designation, but a scholastic and religious appellation. In doing so, and with the Pope visiting the home of the Grand Ayatollah, world media will capture the serene spiritual atmosphere of the holy city, as well as the humble lifestyle of the Ayatollah and his modesty. The kind of modesty that is unparalleled in the entire world. Because while Ayatollah Sistani is the spiritual leader of over 200 million people across the globe, and can amass a personal fortune in the hundreds of billions of dollars, this Shia religious authority, like all of his predecessors, lives in a tiny old mud brick shack located in an alleyway of the old city of Najaf. Quite the contrast from the golden thrones, bejeweled crowns, and dazzling pomposity of other leaders of the world's great religions. The Pope will get to meet a descendant of Abraham who resembles the patriarch of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam better than anyone else he's ever met before. A man who carries their legacy like no other religious leader has. The world will get to witness how the Ayatollah lives like the poorest people despite his influence and global reach, where his mere dismay or the hint of displeasure can bring down entire governments, as it did in 2019 most recently, where the Prime Minister and his entire cabinet resigned when the representative of the Grand Ayatollah hinted that it should. In a recent meeting with the Grand Ayatollah, he told us, I've had the pleasure of seeing him many times, but in this particular meeting, the 40 square meter house that he lives in, just think about that for a moment. 400 square foot, tiny old home that he uses as his personal dwelling. He said that this house is in fact an endowment for people who don't own a house, and they must satisfy certain conditions to be able to live in it. He said that he had thus instructed his children that they are not to inherit the house after his death. And while we in the Shia world are used to this level of asceticism, others cannot fathom how someone who wields so much power and controls vast sums of money can be so detached from personal comforts. What you need to understand is that Ayatollah Sistani sees himself as a small student of Imam Ali. This, my dear viewers, is the single most important message in the Pope's visit to the holy city of Najaf. That as great as Ayatollah Sistani is, as unparalleled as he is, as incredibly humble as he is, as accessible as he is a reflection of the legend of Ali that inspires our leaders with such modesty and self-discipline. It was his life, meaning that of Ali, that taught us that true love can only be acquired when one genuinely cares for others, such that he experiences the life of the poorest and most marginalized people. Imam Ali, whose grave blesses Najaf, and his shrine is the center of this holy city, was an ascetic, just like his brothers Jesus and Moses. But unlike those prophets, Ali was a leader of 50 present-day nations, from northern Libya to eastern Afghanistan, yet despite his expansive and powerful empire, lived in such extreme austerity that baffles people to this day, and has garnered the kind of devotion that over 1 billion Muslims, as well as many non-Muslims, revere him for. He had no bodyguards and despised the idea of an entourage. He had only one article of clothing and stitched his own shoes. When he moved to this very same city of Najaf, Imam Ali refused to step into the palaces of his predecessors and instead lived in a mud house he built with his own bare hands. His food was so stale and simple that his guests often appealed to his children to show mercy to their father by adding some oil to the rock-hard barley bread that was his only meal. His ethos was to live at the same standard as his poorest citizens, and was so accessible that a Jew once came to the city and asked about him and was told that he could find him digging wells for the public. Imagine the emperor, the king, the leader is out there digging wells with his own bare hands so that strangers passing by would have access to water in those barren lands. So this Jewish man searches for Ali, and when he sees him, he notices that Imam Ali was resting under a palm tree, all alone, taking a rest from the laborious task. He looked at Ali and he said to him, "Adalta fatma'nant." Your justice makes you safe, as he had no fear of being assassinated. Let us pray, my dear brothers and sisters, Muslim and Christian, that let world leaders realize, as does the Vatican, that the Shia are a major global community that must not only be recognized, but respected. It is this very community that defended the Christian minority in Iraq when ISIS unleashed its poisonous fangs. It is the same community that has insisted on equal rights for all Iraqis, irrespective of faith or ethnicity. It is these same people that contribute to their respective communities across the globe, as immigrants, as citizens, and as religious leaders. It is high time we are treated not as a small sect or a political entity, but as a worldwide community devoted to peace and justice. The fact that Iraq is a democracy that awards all of its citizens equal rights is because of the Shia, who represent the majority. But more importantly, it is thanks to the Shia religious authority that ensured minorities do not feel disenfranchised by their government. Despite the fact that Christians played a part in the Saddam regime. For example, Tariq Aziz, Saddam's vice president, was a Christian, while the Shia were Saddam's #1 victims. Yet that did not mean that we would hold all Christians responsible for the crimes of the Ba'ath Party. Far from it. It was the Shia religious leaders that stipulated that such religious minorities as Christians are to be protected, and that we would lay our lives for their safety if we had to. We strive to adhere to the statement, the timeless declaration of Imam Ali, who upon appointing a new governor to Egypt, told him, "People are either your brothers in faith or your counterparts in creation." These eternal words could only stem from a true vicegerent of God like Ali. This is why any Christian who has come into contact with his legend cannot help but fall in love with him. As the famous Lebanese Christian author and poet Paul Salama says, "لا تقل شيعة هواة علي إن في كل منصف شيعية." Don't say that it's only the Shia that adore and love Ali. Anyone with the slightest hint of decency can't help but fall in love with him. هو فخر التاريخ لا فخر شعب يصطفيه ويدعيه وليا. He is the pride of history, not just a group of people. جلجل الحق في المسيحية حتى صار من فرط حبه علوية. Love has flourished in this Christian man, he says, to the point where he is absolutely in awe and in love with Ali. أنا من يعشق البطولة والإلهام والعدل والخلق الرضية. I am someone, he says, that loves bravery. I love these great virtues. I love justice. I love good morals. فإذا لم يكن علي نبيا فلقد كان خلقه نبويا. If Ali was not a prophet, then he had prophetic morals and ethics. سفر خير الأنام من بعد طه ما رأى الكون مثله آدميا. يا سماء اشهدي ويا أرض قري واخشعي إنني قد ذكرت عليا. O heavens, you should bear witness. O earth, you must settle and bow down, for I have called the name of Ali.